Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. On the show tonight, the state's attorney's office says no criminal charges will be filed against 2 police officers involved in fatal shootings last year. We have community reaction.
Police officers have to abide by the same standards for employment as every other city employee.
Standoff over the vaccination status of Chicago police officers. What's next?
Not one day has gone by that I haven't cried.
The mother of a drunk driving victim fights to prevent future fatalities, but there are cost and privacy concerns.
Work with us, not against us.
Older people plead to make an agreement as Chicago's ward map moves closer to a public referendum. A look at how Russians are reacting to their country's invasion of Ukraine and the role state-run media is playing.
I would like to be able to travel without fear.
Just a fraction of Chicago's intersections have audio signals for blind pedestrians. A class action lawsuit aims to change that. An amendment to the Equal Pay Act means new requirements are coming to some Illinois businesses, what the changes could mean for the gender pay gap.
The incubator would be useless if they're unable to use their creative freedom and expression.
And how a residency program is helping culinary artists get their recipes off the ground. But first, some of today's top stories. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx announces her office will not be charging the 2 Chicago police officers that shot and killed 13-year-old Adam Toledo and 22-year-old Anthony Alvarez. Both were on-duty shootings just days apart. Foxx says her office reviewed the evidence of both shootings and decided against charging officers Eric Stillman and Evan Solano. Toledo and Alvarez were each killed after being chased on foot by officers, sparking calls to reform the department's foot pursuit policy. CPD has revised that policy in part by banning officers from pursuing suspects involved in minor crimes unless they pose an immediate danger to the community. Attorneys for Toledo's family say they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Officer Stillman and the city. We have local reaction coming up in the program. Dozens of families of late veterans are filing lawsuits against the state of Illinois over what they say was a preventable COVID outbreak at a veterans home. Attorneys say 26 of the 27 veterans listed in the lawsuit died at the state-run LaSalle Veterans Home. One of the attorneys filing the suit says safety protocols were well known by the time of the outbreak in late 2020.
What didn't the state do? The state had no communication of a plan. They had no plan. They had no training. They had no assessment. In many cases, they weren't wearing masks. They had no hand sanitizers. They didn't even have morphine ordered by a doctor to mitigate the painful death many of our clients suffered.
Meanwhile, overseas, Kyiv has entered a 36-hour curfew following the airstrike of 4 multi-story residential buildings. This, according to the Associated Press. As Russia increased its attack, European Union leaders met via video with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky is set to give a joint virtual address to U.S. Congress members tomorrow morning. Be sure to join us tomorrow for local congressional reaction to that address. And up next, local reaction to the state's attorney's decision not to file charges in the fatal shootings of Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
As we mentioned earlier, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx announces her office will not file criminal charges against the police officers who killed Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez last year. Foxx says her office considered first and second-degree murder charges against Officer Eric Stillman in Toledo's death and for Officer Evan Solano in Alvarez's death, but the office ultimately decided that evidence was, quote, insufficient to support criminal charges. And joining us now with reaction are Mateo Zapata, a photojournalist. He wrote an op-ed last year for the Chicago Tribune titled "We Are Adam." For many youth across Chicago's south and west sides, Adam Toledo's life trajectory is too familiar. and Baltasar Enriquez, president of the Little Village Community Council. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight, and I want to read a little bit from Fox's decision today. She said, quote, "The charging decision made by the state's attorney's office must be rooted in the calculus of whether Officer Stillman's perception of whether he was in danger of imminent harm, which caused him to fatally shoot Adam Toledo, was reasonable given the totality of the circumstances surrounding the incident. Based on all of that, my office will not be filing charges in this case against Officer Stillman." Again, this is the Adam Toledo case. Baltasar, your reaction to this decision?
So we here at the Little Village community, we're outraged. Number one, Officer Stillman suffered from PTSD. He had just done 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he was a trigger-happy officer. We could see that. We know that. We could hear it in his potty mouth. He tackled one individual but couldn't tackle the second one? Come on, man. So it shows that he clearly is a trigger-happy officer, and therefore he should be charged with the murder of Adam Toledo. His action proved that he is an individual that acts before thinking. And here, yeah, we see that he gives the order to the child to raise his hands. The child raises his hand, and he still shoots him. We know it was a split-second decision, but just like we said, that's a 98-pound child. He could have tackled him down. He could have done 1,000 different things, but he decided to shoot him, kill him, because he's a trigger-happy officer.
But I have to emphasize here, Baltasar, that the state's attorney found that there was no criminal intent, or at least she didn't feel she could prove criminal intent here, and that he did have reasonable he had reason to believe that he might be in danger. Mateo Zapata, your reaction?
I think that her decision is going to further normalize Chicago police officers knowing that they won't be held accountable if they kill Black and brown kids in the city of Chicago. You know, Officer Stillman signed up to be a Chicago police officer. And if a 13-year-old with his hands up, unarmed, is going to strike that much fear in him, then he shouldn't be a police officer, period.
And in the case of Anthony Alvarez, Fox did acknowledge, although not guilting, the shooting did bring up problems with CPD's foot pursuit policy, and that the officers were not completely free of any kind of culpability here. She said, quote, "I want to take a moment to make something abundantly clear about the shooting of Anthony Alvarez. While the evidence is insufficient to support criminal charges, it is important to highlight that the officers themselves created the conditions which the use of deadly force became necessary." Baltasar Enriquez, your response to that statement?
So the officer shoots him in the back. He didn't show any threat towards the officer. And then when the officer shoots him, he doesn't know where he's at, loses his glasses, and right there it shows that the negligence. And then it shows that he killed him because he knew Anthony beforehand. So he knew his address, he knew where he lived at. He could have chased him to his house or arrived to his house. But the officer decided to kill him. And again, we have that trigger-happy officers. Solano has been already caught where he pulls his gun out on another civilian. So he should not be representing the Chicago Police Department, and he should be terminated and charged with murder automatically.
Mateo Zapata, you brought up the fact that you believe this might normalize the police shootings of Black and brown children. What has the overall community reaction been, do you think, especially in Little Village and in Hermosa and parts of the Northwest Side where these 2 incidents took place?
I think people are disappointed, heartbroken. I mean, there's no accountability here for either of these situations. You know, like Baltasar said, Anthony was shot in the back. You know, Chicago police officers cannot and should not be shooting people in the back. Anthony had not used his weapon. He, you know, didn't endanger himself, and he wasn't presenting a danger to the police officers. He had his back towards them. And this is definitely, in my opinion, going to normalize how Chicago police officers treat Black and brown people in their communities.
And in response to these shootings, Baltasar, the mayor attempted to reform the CPD's foot pursuit policy, or institute one in the first place. Have there been enough reforms that give you confidence that these foot pursuits will be safe?
I mean, we could write up 1,000 foot pursuits, but if the police officers are not following it, are not respecting it, what's the point? And we saw it on the Ella French situation. They were supposed to wait for backup, and they didn't. and that's why Ella French is dead, because they think they're RoboCops. They think they're beyond the law. So that's what happens when you have those tough cops. So we need to have this community-based police department, not a military-based police department. So we keep asking that the police department reaches out to the community, engages in the community, participates in the community, become the community, instead of being tough guys. We don't need tough guys. That's why we need to civilize our police department and make sure that they're held accountable for every action they do. And we should not be paying millions of taxes on stupidity that they do. So that's the problem, that we keep paying the price and being the victim at the same time for actions that they do, and they're not being held accountable. So they have immunity. So the police department has the biggest gang in the city of Chicago, and then they have the union, which is another gang. So FOP is stronger than COPA. The FOP is stronger than the mayor. So if we start having some balance, check and balances with the police department, we will go somewhere. But if they're allowed to kill, then yeah.
We should mention the FOP has battled all of these agencies. Mateo, you wrote in your op-ed that Adam Toledo was sort of the result of systemic failure all around him. Explain that.
I mean, Chicago has enabled the culture of gang violence that exists today. You're talking about the same police department that was encouraging gangs to claim their territory during the social unrest of 2020. Police need to stop being presented as a solution to combat the violence that's happening in our communities. I'm a strong believer that we need to defund the police in the city, and we need to provide funding for extracurricular learning along with violence prevention initiatives. Police are not a solution to the violence taking place in our communities. They enable it, and they cause it, and they create the conditions for situations like what happened to Adam and Anthony to occur.
All right, we're going to have to leave the discussion there. Our thanks to Baltazar Enriquez and Mateo Zapata. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Speaking of police, Chicago police officers had until Sunday to comply with the Lightfoot administration's vaccine mandate for city workers or get pulled off the payroll. This after a labor arbitrator sided with the mayor. But as of now, over 2,500 police officers have not gotten vaccinated or reported their status, according to city data. That's about 20% of the police department compared to about 95% of all other city workers. In a letter to Mayor Lightfoot, 12 Chicago alderpeople are calling for her to rescind the mandate and are demanding a special city council meeting tomorrow. The mayor is calling the letter, quote, fear-mongering, and says a mass firing of non-compliant officers will not happen.
Certainly, we're going to hold people accountable, and police officers have to abide by the same standards for employment as every other city employee. But this notion that somehow we're going to terminate masses of police officers, that we're going to compromise public safety. Recall, they rattled that saber last fall, and they were wrong then, and they're wrong now.
And Lightfoot also says she would not be attending the special meeting tomorrow, calling it, quote, a political charade. And joining us now with more are 28th Ward Alderman Jason Irvin, who represents parts of the West Side, and 15th Ward Alderman Ray Lopez, who represents parts of the South Side. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight. Alderman Lopez, you're one of the 12 signing this letter arguing for a natural immunity option for police officers. Explain your position.
You know, as our knowledge of COVID and the pandemic has evolved, so too should our policies. And that needs to incorporate natural immunity, which is when an individual contracts COVID and builds up their own antibodies in their system, then that should be an option that our employees are able to report through the portal. And unfortunately, the administration has refused to evolve their knowledge and application of policies to match the times that we're in. And we want that option available for those employees. We believe that those employees that have yet to go to the portal would do so if that third option of proving that they have natural immunity was available to them.
Alderman Jason Irvin, you take the other side of this. You say the police officers are holding the city hostage. What do you mean?
I think that the members of the Chicago Police Department need to comply with the orders that the rest of the city employees have complied with, which is to report their status and to get vaccinated. We should not have the anticipation for citizens coming for police service or police officers coming to their homes and put them in greater harm than when they were not there. So I believe that part of what the mayor administration is asking for, which is something that we've asked healthcare professionals to do, other people that are in settings where they have high contact with the public, which is to be vaccinated.
Alderman Lopez, the immunology test or the antibody test can be expensive. It can be time consuming. Do you believe if police officers want to go this route, they should pay for it out of pocket?
I believe if that is something that they're interested in, then their insurance should be able to cover it. If that is an option that is recognized by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as legitimate, then we should not be standing in the way. We cannot continue to cherry pick the science simply to fit the narrative, and that's exactly what this administration continues to do. We are simply asking that it evolve its standards and policies to keep pace with the current scientific data that is out there and not continue to rely on information from a year and a half ago, which is woefully out of date, and not to mention completely arbitrary, as stated by the Commissioner of Human Resources that said these dates and deadlines have no scientific bearing. They are strictly picked by the mayor herself to force the issue with our employees.
Alderman Irvin, the deadline for the first shot has come and gone. The mayor said there's not going to be a mass firing, even though about 20% of police officers still have not reported their vaccine status. So how will this play out to avoid some kind of mass layoffs?
Well, I think that part of the challenge has been there has not been any true enforcement of the policy at a mass level. I do believe that this is not about vaccination. This is not about science. This is about who's going to run the Chicago Police Department. Are the officers going to run the department, or will management run the department? The department has a leader in David Brown, that is under the control of the executive branch of government. And I think this is more about a power play. Even tomorrow's conversation in the special meeting is about sending a resolution to a committee. Again, more hijinks and political standing without really trying to get to the root or even try to solve the challenge that Alderman Lopez and his colleagues have put on the table. To have a resolution to be sent to a committee to call for a special meeting about this is more political grandstanding and hijinks, because it's not going to solve the problem of the officers that may be impacted, nor is it going to move the needle any further on this particular matter, other than put an item in the committee 7 days earlier than when we would for our next meeting coming up next week.
Alderman Lopez, what about that? I mean, the meeting's going to happen tomorrow. The mayor said she's not going, and the most that can come out of it is a resolution, but nothing that would bind the city to anything. So what's the point?
Not even a resolution.
Paris, this is the one time that I think this week Alderman Irvin and I are in complete agreement that this is not about science, it's not about the vaccine, it's about control. And the one pulling the hijinks is the mayor. There have been numerous ordinances, orders, and resolutions introduced throughout the last 2 years trying to protect our employees, trying to protect our families, their families, as we work through the ever-evolving science of the pandemic. And the one who's put the hijinks, as my colleague says, and is playing games is the mayor by putting bricks on all of the chairmen to which all of these ordinances, resolutions, and orders have been assigned. We talk about officers, we talk about our first responders, we talk about our employees as being essential, yet this council has done absolutely nothing to address their needs, their concerns, and their fears. And I'm sorry if that inconveniences some people on the city council that we have to take this up when the mayor's off to Florida, but we should be meeting religiously to ensure that all of the best policies and practices are in place that are fair, equitable, and incorporate the full scope of science and not just the ones that fit the mayor's control narrative.
Alderman Irvin, you know, the city did drop the vax mandate, the indoor vax mandate and mask mandate. Why not then drop the vax mandate for city employees?
I think that the vaccination, again, these are members of the public. There are public employees that are coming to serve the public. And people that are being serviced by us as city government should not walk into a situation where there's the potential fear that they may be exposed to something that very well could easily have been controlled with the vaccine. So I think it's incumbent upon us as government not to put our residents at risk by having people that are servicing them carrying a potentially deadly disease to their doorsteps.
And on the other side of that, Alderman Lopez, nearly half of Chicago police officers have gotten COVID. 6 have died. Isn't it protecting their safety to have them get the vaccine?
Absolutely. All of this should be about protecting the safety of not just our police officers, but our firemen, other first responders, and all of those employees that we've asked to continue to work without fail every day since the pandemic started. Not everyone has had the luxury of getting a vaccine and working from home or working via Zoom. Some people had to show up and had to meet the public. And while we know that officers have died from COVID, this council has refused to address the fact that they should be receiving a death benefit for going to work, doing the essential work that we asked them to, and left their families with little recompense after their passing. We play a lot of lip service to their safety, but do very little to ensure it.
All right, I know these debates will be going on tomorrow at that special meeting, and we will follow that. But for now, our thanks to Alderman Jason Irvin and Alderman Ray Lopez.
Thank you.
Illinois is set to receive billions of dollars from the federal infrastructure bill President Joe Biden signed into law late last year. But the law does more than allocate money for road and construction projects. Among other things, it's set to change the types of cars you'll drive. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more of that.
Yeah, Paris, changing the types of cars that you and I drive, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that this is about a move to electric and hybrid vehicles. And in fact, the infrastructure law does put the U.S. on that path. But we're talking about a different provision tonight. This is one that will, in a handful of years, require all newly manufactured vehicles be equipped with technology that monitors for drunk and impaired driving.
What it would do is to be able to detect the things that are common to drunk and impaired drivers, eye movement, lane crossings, that would automatically either stop or move the car off the road. It also could include requiring, before even starting a car, a breathalyzer test.
Just how it will work is not yet determined, and actually that technology might not even yet exist. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has a few years to come up with minimum standards, and then auto manufacturers have another couple of years to roll out the technology. The key is that it has to be passive, as in a driver won't have to do anything. It'll be automatic.
As the auto industry goes toward autonomous vehicles and they're testing vehicles without steering wheels, right? Driverless cars. They're talking about going all electric. This is doable. You know, this industry has some of the best and the brightest engineers in the world, thousands of them working on solutions to all kinds of problems. And, you know, why not safety?
This is personal for Sheila Lockwood of McHenry. In 2018, her son Austin was killed by a drunk driver just weeks after his 23rd birthday.
I never want another family to have to go through what we've been through. Losing Austin destroyed our lives.
She says that increasing penalties for drunk driving may punish, it may give families like her some solace, it may work as a deterrent. But Lockwood says preventing impaired people from driving will save lives.
Austin would still be here if that technology would have been on that vehicle. Austin, that vehicle never would have started. The person that murdered my son, and that's the way I look at it, because I do feel that it's preventable. I would pay for everybody to have this technology if I could get my son back, you know.
But the ACLU's Jay Stanley is raising privacy concerns. He says that modern cars are basically computers on wheels as is. They spy on their owners, sending data back to car manufacturers that can then be sent to data brokers who sell the information.
Modern cars are collecting information from the performance of the car itself, to your location, to information from your entertainment system when you connect your phone to it. Even things like the weight of the driver and things like that are collected by modern cars.
Happens, he asks, when cars begin to collect data from passive impairment device systems.
If it's intimate physiological information about our bodies, potentially including your heart rate, your breathing rate, who knows how else this is going to work, that would be a big privacy issue because that could reveal a lot of health conditions that people might have and so forth.
At this point, the law does not stipulate anything when it comes to privacy in either direction. I asked Kathy Chase, who's head of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety, to respond to these privacy concerns.
Keep also in mind that you're on public roadways and you're sharing the road. It's not just, I've decided to glance at a text. You're on the roadways with everyone, imperiling everyone else. So you don't have the heightened expectation of privacy that one would in their own home, for example, because you're out on a public roadway.
She, as well as advocates from MAD, say that the objective is not to collect forensic data, rather it's to prevent crashes from happening in the first place. They say once implemented in full, this could save more than 9,000 lives a year. The ACLU's Jay Stanley says that there should be a way to meet in the middle to protect privacy while also using more of this technology to save lives. He says the ACLU will be fighting for those terms to be spelled out. For instance, requiring law enforcement to have to obtain a warrant in order to access data from these detectors. Now, the earliest that the impairment systems will be in all new cars, the earliest would be 2026. It could take longer. Other safety provisions that are also included in the infrastructure law could be rolled out first. For example, cars will have to all come with automatic emergency braking systems that are already included with many luxury vehicles.
Automatic emergency braking can address numerous issues, including impairment, distraction, drowsy driving, because what happens is the car's braking system takes over and sends an alert, and then if the driver doesn't react, the car actually brakes for you. So that's why we're pushing so hard for these systems to get into cars as soon as possible. Every family deserves the safest braking system at a minimum.
Newly manufactured vehicles also will soon have to have another system that's common in more high-priced luxury vehicles, and that is an alert that goes off if a child or a car is perhaps, or a child or a pet, that is inadvertently left in a hot car. With that, Paris, back to you.
All right, a lot of changes on the way. Thanks, Amanda. A federal judge this month allowed a lawsuit over the safety of Chicago's crosswalks for blind pedestrians to proceed as a class action. Almost none of the thousands of signalized intersections in the city have devices giving audio cues to people who are blind or have low vision. As Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, plaintiffs behind the case want systemic change.
For decades, Ann Brash commuted into the city each day for work. Blind since birth, she's experienced at getting around using a cane, but Chicago's noisy downtown poses a challenge, and in 2017, she had a near miss.
I started to cross the street at an incorrect time, and I almost got hit by a bus. And two people grabbed me back. If they're watching, I'd love to thank those people. But it was a close call, and it was so close of a call that it actually sort of split my cane pretty much in half.
Brash says crossing the street used to be simpler for blind people who learned to listen for parallel traffic to start. But over the years, things like ultra-quiet electric cars, new intersection layouts, and changes to how walk signals are timed have made crossing the street more fraught.
We need to have the same number of seconds to cross the street as a sighted person has. The technology exists, and we need to have the same rights and the same access to safety as our sighted counterparts have.
Walk sign is on to cross.
The technology Brash is referring to is an accessible pedestrian signal, which gives audio cues to blind and low vision pedestrians that it's safe to cross. But according to the city, just 26 of Chicago's 2,800 or so signalized intersections have an accessible device.
This being a service that the city provides to the general public, it has a duty to make it accessible to people who are blind as well.
That's why attorneys filed suit against the city, saying its inaccessible intersections violate the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Unfortunately, constituents with disabilities do not tend to be powerful political constituencies in general. It wasn't a priority, and it needed to be a priority.
Since filing the lawsuit in 2019, plaintiffs gained a powerful ally when the Department of Justice intervened in support last year. And this month, the judge overseeing the case allowed the suit to go forward as a class action. And it's a big class. Census Bureau data shows more than 68,000 adults in Chicago with a vision-related disability, in addition to blind and low-vision people who live elsewhere but spend time in the city.
We think it will help convey the importance of the issue and simply the volume of people that it affects every day.
Attorneys for Chicago deny all the plaintiffs' claims, and a spokesperson says the city does not comment on ongoing litigation. Since 2019, officials have outlined plans to add more accessible pedestrian signals. The city told WTTW News it's planning to install 150 this year and next.
We can and we must do better as a city. We must do more to make sure that we are truly inclusive, not just on race or ethnicity, but also on disability.
But at the current rate, it'll take decades for the city to upgrade all its intersections. Plaintiff Ann Brash says she and other people who are blind or have low vision shouldn't have to wait.
It would be really great if we could travel without fear. A lot of times I will wait to cross the street until someone comes by to help, or I'll go out of my way to go across a street that's safer, or a lot of times I will just decide I'm not going where I want to go because I'm afraid.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
And right now, the two sides are working through expert testimony. No trial date has yet been set. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, the latest in the debate over Chicago's ward remap as the proposals move closer to a referendum. How are Russians viewing their country's invasion of Ukraine, and what role do generational differences play? Some Illinois businesses will soon need to apply for equal pay certification, what a new provision in the Equal Pay Act could mean for employees and their employers. And how a residency program is helping culinary artists perfect their entrepreneurial recipe. But first, some more of today's top stories. Today marks the 2-year anniversary of the first COVID death in Illinois. Mayor Lightfoot says despite being in a, quote, much better spot now, the pandemic is not yet over, with 10 to 15 city residents dying every week. She says efforts directed towards addressing racial disparities in COVID vaccination rates are ongoing.
Well, 82% of Chicagoans age 5 and up have had at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine. For Black Chicagoans, that number is just 61%, almost a 20% plus gap. We cannot stop working until vaccination percentages for every demographic in our city are as close to 100% as possible.
Former Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson's lawyers file a motion for a new trial, arguing prosecutors made, quote, improper and prejudicial remarks to the jury. Thompson was convicted in federal court a month ago on 2 counts of lying to federal regulators about loans he'd received from the failed Bridgeport Bank and 5 counts of filing false tax returns. The motion filed today comes as Mayor Lightfoot releases a list of 27 applicants to fill the empty 11th Ward aldermanic seat. A committee will provide a final slate of candidates for the mayor to choose from. Construction is now underway for a new 43rd Street Bridge on South DuSable Lakeshore Drive. Drivers can expect to run into southbound overnight closures starting tonight at 9 through early tomorrow, according to the Chicago Department of Transportation. Normal traffic is set to resume at 5 a.m. Additional closures are scheduled for north and southbound drivers next week. Members of City Council's Black Caucus today filed their version of a ward map with the clerk's office. The move makes it more likely that voters will decide what Chicago's ward boundaries should look like come this June 28th primary. That is, unless 41 alderpeople agree on a map before the end of May. Alderwoman and Rules Committee Chair Michelle Harris made nothing short of a plea to one colleague in particular.
Gil Villegas, let me know when you're serious. When you're serious about coming into the room and working with us to do a map.
And WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us with more on the latest chapter of Chicago's ward map saga. Hey, Heather, we should mention that Villegas had filed the map that he supported, and so now this map is filed. What does it include?
Well, it really comes down to a question over how many wards will have a majority of Black voters and how many wards will have a majority of Latino voters. Alderman Gil Villegas has said he will not accept a map with fewer than 15 wards with a majority of Latino voters, and that is not possible when it comes to the Black caucus, because they are unwilling to accept a map with fewer than 16 wards with a majority of Black voters and 1 ward with a plurality of Black voters. Now, the only thing these two sides agree on is that the next ward map should create Chicago's first ward that has a majority of Asian voters. So that is also included in the map today. That was filed with the city clerk, setting up a head-to-head contest between these two maps for the first time in 30 years.
And that is barring any kind of backroom agreement over the next 3 months or so. So, Heather, why was Harris calling out Villegas today?
Well, it's really seen as sort of Alderman Villegas's show. He is the chairman of the Latino caucus. He has been working with Vice Chair Alderman Silvana Tabarez to really make sure that Latino politicians in Chicago do not accept what they would consider another bad deal. The last time the city council went through a ward remap, Latino alder people felt like they got the short end of the stick, and they are determined to not let that happen again. And Alderman Villegas, who's running for Congress, also in the June primary, is determined to not let that happen. And it has really become a battle of wills between Alderman Harris, who is a member of the Black Caucus and the Rules Committee chair, and Alderman Villegas.
And as we mentioned, voters would have to choose between these two maps in a referendum on the June 20th primary ballot. So what is next in the interim?
Well, we heard from Mayor Lori Lightfoot today that she thinks that a compromise is still possible. I don't know if one is. She also said that she would not endorse one map over the other map. So if things remain where they are today, we are in for quite a contest about what the future of Chicago politics will look like and what that balance of power will be for the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's a simple math problem at this point, Heather. Neither map has the votes necessary. All right.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. Recent polls of Russian public opinion have measured support of the invasion of Ukraine at about 58 to 71% of the population, depending on the poll. And just this week, a Russian state television employee protested the war live on air. How difficult is it to gauge actual public sentiment in that country, and how accurate are those polls? Joining us is someone with experience studying public opinion in Russia, and that is Olga Kamenchuk, an associate research professor at Northwestern University's Institute for Policy Research and an associate professor of instruction in the university's School of Communication. Olga Kamenchuk, welcome back. You were on last week when you had just gotten home from Russia. We mentioned these polls, but it's sort of hard to trust the veracity in an authoritarian state. Where would you gauge the public sentiment in Russia?
Yes, good evening. I have to say that we must admit that majority of Russians do support the war that their country is waging against Ukraine. And yes, between 57 to 65% at the beginning of the war, and up from 65 to 71% towards the third week of the war, because there were several waves of opinion polls which were conducted by different pollsters throughout this war. So the support even grew. However, I must emphasize, even though we see the majority of Russians supporting this war, it's still not the so-called Crimean consensus, which we saw in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, when more than 90% of Russians supported the war. 30% less now. So yes, it's a majority. I would say it's a shaky majority. Really, the nucleus of Mr. Putin's support and support for his adventures and aggressions that he's now waging in Ukraine, that's probably not something between 25% to 30%.
So even that, given the history of Russia and Vladimir Putin, that is not an insignificant number, and there seems to be a generational divide. So how does it split with younger Russians versus older Russians?
Yes, that's true. There are two factors which differ in our polls, in the polls which are conducted in Russia. So usually those are age and type of media use. For example, less than 1/3 of young Russians, people under 25 years old, support the war. I want to repeat, less than 1/3. And then more than 70% of elderly Russians do. So this kind of Soviet generation. So age is one of these factors. And the second one is media use. People who are using internet and social media, especially foreign social media, intensively seem to be associated with less support for the war, while higher reliance on TV news as the major source of information is usually associated with higher support for Russian war in Ukraine.
And this, as President Putin has cracked down on any independent reporting on the war, it's all sort of the state-sanctioned propaganda, although just this week an employee at a Russian state news operation protested live on air. Take a look.
Премьер подчеркнул, надо усилить сотрудничество в рамках союзного государства, а на совещании в правительстве обсуждали, как сохранить...
Given the crackdown and significant penalties for protesters, Olga Kamenchuk, how surprised were you and how significant was this happened?
Yes, you know, we always must remember that protesting in Russia, in Moscow or St. Petersburg, is not like protesting in Paris or in Chicago. If you are protesting there, you are facing almost definitely an arrest. Over 15,000 people by now have been arrested, and many of them are facing charges from 3 to 20 years in jail, depending what you have done. For example, this courageous woman, Marina Ovsyannikova, she is facing right now 2 types of charges, and the heaviest, the worst one of them is fake news charges, and fake news is actually telling the truth about this war. Russians and Russian media cannot say the word war about the war. They have to use the word special operation, and all these propaganda efforts, all this information warfare, which is used by Russian media, state-controlled media, is something which influences the opinion of these Russians, of the Russian audiences that I have presented to you.
I'm sorry, Olga, I just wanted to ask you, the majority of Russian audiences believe what they hear on TV and the TV news, or is there some understanding that a lot of this information is manipulated by the government?
Again, youth, people living in larger metropolitan areas, educated people, intellectuals are the ones also who are protesting. They are the ones who are doubting this information. And also I have to say that previously when Russians had access to some opposition media, it was also contributing to telling a different story. Right now, Kremlin shut down the 2 major media, opposition media, Echo of Moscow and TV Rain, it blocked Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter in Russia. Foreign media, international media, which they could not control otherwise. However, many Russians are learned to use VPNs, circumvention tools, to get a hold of social media and to get a hold of information that is not controlled by the state.
So there are ways around that. All right, very interesting information, Olga Kamenchuk, and we should mention you were just in Russia up until last week, so firsthand knowledge of what's happening there. We'll have to check in with you again. And our thanks to Olga Kamenchuk.
Thank you.
Some Illinois employers will soon have to apply for an equal pay registration certificate, and they'll have to provide workforce demographics and pay data. It's part of an amendment to the Illinois Equal Pay Act that legislators passed last year, an effort to address the gender pay gap. And it comes as women, and especially women of color, have acutely felt the economic impact of COVID-19 as they disproportionately work in industries affected by the pandemic. And joining us to talk about the new rules on Equal Pay Day are Jason Keller, Assistant Director at the Illinois Department of Labor, and Sharita Ellens, President and CEO of Women Employed. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago Tonight. Sharita, first, let's dispense with some statistics here. According to the National Women's Law Center, women on average are paid 82 cents for every dollar their male counterparts make. Meanwhile, black women only earn 63 cents to their white male counterparts, and Latinas earn just 55 cents. So, Sharita, first, remind us how the pandemic impacted these numbers.
Thank you so much. And yes, the pandemic impacted this number because we know that women, and in particular Black and Latinx women, were disproportionately impacted by the labor force of the pandemic, meaning the jobs that they were in were either decimated, they had to reduce hours, our childcare system just blew up. And so many women found themselves having to stay at home and remove themselves from the workforce so that they could take care of their childcare responsibilities. So that really impacted the wages that they earned over the last year. In addition to that, the jobs that women earned back, as we are coming back into the workforce, many of those jobs are in low wage roles. So even the wages that are coming back are much lower than the wages that men are earning.
So major impacts here from the pandemic. And Sharita, remind us, today is Equal Pay Day. Why is today mark that day?
Today marks Equal Pay Day because we've calculated that this is the day for the average woman where it takes her to earn income parity with men. So based off of what men earned last year, ending in December 2021, on average, women have to work to today to earn the same pay. And then that obviously changes when you think, when you disaggregate the data. For Black women, it would be in September. And for Native women and Latinas, it's all the way in December. So they have to work a full year in addition to men to reach the same pay.
To make the same salary. All right, Jason Keller, the Illinois General Assembly enacted some changes to the Illinois Equal Pay Act. Tell us what those changes entail.
So the changes that we are charged with implementing here are requiring private employers with 100 or more employees to file registration documents with us to show that they are paying their employees an equal wage or salary. Once we receive those documents, we will verify those wage and salary amounts and look at them on a county level basis and conclude if they do pay their employees equally, we will give them a certificate based upon the law.
And if it's found that they're not in compliance with that, what happens?
So if they are not in compliance after turning in their materials, we will respond within 45 days of receiving their information. And in that amount of time, we will tell them what looks incorrect with the documents that they provided. They will then have 30 days to cure those deficiencies in their pay data and return those to us.
All right, Sharita Ellens, what do you think these changes will mean for equal pay in Illinois?
Well, it would certainly get us to at least equal pay for equal work. The Equal Pay Act actually passed in 2003, and we still see persistent wage gaps for equal pay for equal work. So it'll give, employers an opportunity to take a look at their data, which, many of them are not, and identifying if there are issues there that they need to address. And then two, it opens up this notion of pay transparency and allow employees access to information that they should have. So it's this, if you can't see it, right, you can't push for it. So it will give them an opportunity to kind of have another way of advocating for themselves, because the data, especially for those employers who are not compliant, will become public.
And Jason, as I understand, there's a $10,000 fine for employers that ultimately are not compliant. So what would have to be proven in order to enact a fine like that?
I think we will look at whether or not they are paying their employees equally. And if not, we would look at that penalty stage. But we would also look and see if a business is not complying with reporting this information to us. If they're just willfully not reporting it to us, then we would look at the penalty stage. But we always reach compliance first.
And Sharita, you brought up the major impacts the pandemic has had. Numbers are down now, but that doesn't mean that they can't go back up. So what kind of supports need to be put in place here to get women, especially and women of color, back up to the level that they were at, and then up to the level of their male counterparts?
Yeah, I think one is the table stakes. It's equal pay for equal work. Like, enough. It's time to get that fixed. Another thing that we really have to look at is occupational segregation. This is an opportunity for us in our workforce development strategies and our recovery strategies to make sure that we are putting women on a path to careers that actually offer sustainable wages, which are oftentimes careers that are dominated by men. We also need to use this opportunity to kind of change the narrative and have conversations around these essential jobs, these frontline jobs, these jobs that are held by women in childcare, in healthcare. We need to have conversations around it's time to raise those wages. There's no reason why those are some of the lowest paid occupations out there just because they're dominated by men. And when we know they're so essential to our economy and to our society. And we need to begin looking at infrastructure of care and looking at care as infrastructure, not just child care, but elder care and care for disabilities, because we know in order to get women back to the workforce, we have to shore that up because they carry the burden of care in this country.
All right, well, that's where we'll have to leave it. And our thanks to Jason Keller and Sharita Ellens for talking about this important subject. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, but first we take a look at the weather. A local artist in residency program has officially welcomed its second cohort. The program, a part of the retreat at Currency Exchange Cafe, aims to encourage entrepreneurship and was created during the pandemic when culinary artists found themselves without spaces to expand their talents. Arts correspondent Angel Ito introduces us to the culinary artists behind Control Z Coffee and Dozie's Grill.
For the last 14 years, culinary artist Dozie Ibekwe has been working to make West African dishes more popular in the city. He says that from Montrose Avenue to the south suburbs, there are only about 5 West African restaurants. He's hoping to change that with help from the Rebuild Foundation's retreat at Currency Exchange Cafe.
The Rebuild is all about bringing life into dead spaces. And I've just seen that manifest in my experience here.
Located on East Garfield Boulevard, just blocks away from Hyde Park, this cafe serves as an incubator for culinary artists looking to expand their crafts without the stresses that come with starting a business.
We use the various spaces inside of this building to support a multitude of artists and creatives here. So we have a bar. Instead of determining on our own or dictating what it's going to be, the residents will be able to come in and within the tools that we offer them, conform the space to them. And they already have a lot to think about. And so to be able to relieve them of that stress, it creates a lane for them to think a little bit more clearly and to feel supported by us.
The Afrobeat salad.
From a colorful beet salad to a jarrito wrap consisting of chicken and jollof rice, Dozie of Dozie's Grill says he's begun to expand his creative palette without having to worry about his financial one.
Rebuild Foundation is also about Black art, and of course what we do is an art. Hospitality is indeed an art. From the ideation to the testing out recipes, developing a menu, building a menu that connects with myself as a chef, and of course with the communities.
The cafe also serves as a work and event space for the community. Xandro Zafra of Control Z Coffee says he appreciates the opportunity to test different recipes on customers that are reflective of his Filipino heritage.
We want to have my flavor in it, so it can be ube, pandan, which is like a Philippine dessert that we use in the Philippines. Ube is purple yam. Pandan is more of a leaf. It's like vanilla, but like with a tropical twist to it. First sip, they're just all blown out. Something different they haven't had before, something unique, and something they can love.
Oh, it's really good. While the first cohort consisted of 3 culinary artists, this round only features Dozie and Xandro. They say it's allowed them to create menus that not only complement their goals, but complement each other's skills as well.
We've been collaborating, of course, on all manner of ways we can help each other grow. We're providing coffee pastries, some savory breakfast pastries as well.
While the end goal is to open brick-and-mortar locations, the culinary artists say they're grateful to experience a residency that's committed to both their creative and entrepreneurial goals.
It's really important, I think, to feel psychologically safe, whether it's as an employee or as an entrepreneur. I can say that this is a true retreat.
Wow. That's really good.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
That does look delicious. And if you're interested in trying out Dozie's Grill or Control Z Coffee, visit Retreat at the Currency Exchange Cafe Monday through Friday. They'll be there through July when the residency ends. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Ukraine's president is set to address Congress members. We share local reaction. And no charges against the officers who fatally shot Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.